I am a student in the University of Boya. I'm a passionate volunteer with the Just Like You Global Foundation, and this is because the organization advocates against abuse. And not only that, it also helps or supports survivors with getting healing. And so, with this, first off, I am a survivor, and to see an institution that is out for the well-being of children or preventing women, girls, children from being abused or helping those who have already been abused overcome the abuse is something that I have to be passionate about. Well, I am a survivor of child rape or infant rape, better still. And I do not know if I have to narrate my entire story, but I really cannot, as for age, I really cannot tell what age exactly I was. At the time, I can say probably primary four or primary three. Yes. The sad thing about my abuse is it had to be a relative. And also, it included neighbors. And so it's both ways, relative and neighbors. Mm, Yes, it started with a relative, then other perpetrators. Well, so I would say the interval of my abuse would take, say, within a year of being abused by a relative and then being abused by other perpetrators. So it was just within the same period. What was very peculiar about about the abuse was, first off, as a child, I engaged with other children. And during engagements with children and some who are a little older and say somehow exposed to sexual stuff, you always hear conversations like, oh, this one is not a virgin. This one is a virgin. I am still a virgin. So most often I will not tell that, oh, I am a virgin or not, but I'll always feel guilty. And in most instances, I always asked, but why? For the case of the relative, I always wondered on if there was something wrong with me that really made them to want to abuse me, or I really do not understand why he had to abuse me. I don't know if it's, sometimes I even ask, is it that I was, there are some children, they say they're like Ashawo children. So sometimes I was like, is it that I was like an Ashawo child or something that I got abused? Because those are some of the things that make me feel different from other children. Like, okay, this is already happening to me. I can hear my friends saying, I'm still a virgin, I'm still not a virgin, and you understand what that means. Like, and so I always felt like there was something wrong with me. Nobody actually knew about my abuse until I became an advocate against the abuse. I did not share my story with any family relatives because my abuser made sure that I felt like I was not enough, or I was a bad luck child, as he always called me, or I was a bordel, like he always called me. So I felt sharing my story was not going to make any sense, and it was probably going to cause just problems in the family. And for a child who was very energetic and playful, I used to play a lot. So maybe they were going to think I am the cause of it. So I really did not feel that anybody was going to believe. And also I was afraid that I was going to cause problems. So with all of that, I decided not to share with anyone. During the period when I was abused, things did not change quite a lot during that period. Within the period I was abused, but things changed later. And that is when I became a teenager. So I always felt like there was something wrong, like I earlier mentioned, for someone who was abused as a child. When you grow older, you become a teenager, you get more information from other teens. And so when some people say, oh, I have not experienced this, especially if you are friends with those who are more Christian-like, you feel like you are the sinner child to have experienced all of those. So I became more isolative and quiet as I grew older, and I would basically not really interact with so many people. And again, I also developed a fear for environments where I would find just men and boys, because it always gave me that I just felt like I could be abused. And also, any space where I would find a child with an adult, All what I could see is abuse. I could not see that this is a loving father and your child. What I'm looking at is a potential perpetrator and his victim. So it changed a lot for me that I just fear anywhere I find. I just see abuse. So that is how things changed for me. When my parents were alive during that time, yes, my mother was still alive. And for my father is somehow because I do not know who he is. So maybe he's alive, maybe he's not. And so, but my stepfather was still alive. Yes. Oh well. Nobody could pick up why because it was as a very energetic child, right? I would play a lot. I can leave, I can disappear from the house in the morning and come back at night. That is how playful I was. And so at the times when I was changing, it was more like this one is becoming a good child instead. So it was difficult for them to relate like this is an abuse they've suffered and this is something that is making them to close up. And so instead, it was more like this is she's becoming more calm, more grown, more reserved as what we would want. So how did I cope? Or how am I coping? That is a better question. Because abuse, to cope with abuse, I don't know. I don't think I don't know when maybe I'll reach a stage or a day when I'll be like, oh, I finally overcame abuse. Right, so how I coped. Basically, what made me say grow out of some of the things that enclosed me as a survivor of the abuse was being able to share my story, being able to talk about it, becoming an advocate against the abuse, and being able to see that at least a child um, who was abused knows that this is something that is wrong and is able to stand against it. And a child who hasn't been abused knows that this is something wrong and I should not suffer it. So that was my own way of coping or healing. And that is still when I got into secondary school, say from four. Yes, when I started sharing my story and stuff. So I had to go back to my very roots, and that is my school, because I know of a perpetrator who has abused so many children from my school. Growing up, I know him, and I think he's still there now. I really don't know. Every time I think about it, I feel like there's something I have to do, but I don't know what I have to do. But I had to go back there because I felt that was his place where he saw so many children he could abuse, and a place where he got so many children, where he made so many children his victims. There was something very particular about my school. It's a government primary school in Old Town, a small neighborhood in Bamenda. And there, this man lives directly behind the school. So what happens is when you cannot afford PTA, you are sent home. And that is how he gets children who are sent home. So when you're passing, he uses sweets, he uses money. And since his house is just behind, most of the people in that area are usually not around when it is, say, normal work day. That is when he gets children into his room and he abuses them. And so I don't know if maybe someone has, by any chance, seen him abusing a child. But until the time when I left primary school, he always got away with it. Now I am advocating basically to see that we do not have more survivors of the abuse. And this is being done in terms of awareness raising, school to school, church to church, market to market, neighborhood to neighborhood, door to door. I have done all of that just because I find fulfillment in the sense that I know that at least one child will know how to protect themselves, or at least one child will stop their perpetrator from abusing them. And so it's more of me sharing my story and more of me telling the children how they can be able to see potential perpetrators, how they can report, and also identifying those who have been abused and linking them up to persons who can help them out, either trauma healing or maybe just doing normal medical checkup. Yes, so many children get to open up or can easily relate when I share my story. And this is because perpetrators of abuse, I don't know if I should say they have just, unless there's something else they do, but They have no other advanced method of getting their victims. So when I share my story, a child can be able to identify like, oh, at this point, this person was touching my breast. At this point, this person was touching my buttocks. So once they hear this and they know that my breast is a red body part, my buttocks is a red body part, then they can easily, when you look at their faces, even when you're sharing your story, you can see who has been abused. For a survivor, I can easily, because there is always a moment where you see a child is lost because they are also getting back to their stories. Even if they haven't been abused, you would see that maybe someone attempted to abuse them or they saw someone abuse someone. So what they will do is, it's like a moment of reflection, I think, like, okay, so this is what was happening, and then they come back. And so you can easily just pick out like this one, because that is what I would do normally as a child when someone comes to talk about things like menstruation, or if they're talking about rape or sex. That is how I will feel. And sometimes you can easily identify those victims by seeing the ones that become instantly very shy or quiet, because they are afraid that maybe if they become too active or if they talk too much, you see that, oh, this person was abused. Or if they become too talkative, some is when they become too talkative, so that you wouldn't pick them out as abused. In other cases, some will become very defensive, so that you will not see them as abused. So, my little exposure has made it possible that at least I've lived little bits of what other survivors have. So I can be able to relate to this person and relate to this person and relate to this person and make them feel that um, it is not us who is the problem, it is the perpetrator who is the problem. And our abuse should not make us feel less. Do I feel that parents have an important role to play in terms of preventing their children from being abused? I say yes. And parents can ensure that their children are protected first by communicating with them effectively. In terms of being able to talk about things like rape, you might not want to go directly in a conversation with your child in terms of, oh, have you heard about sexual intercourse? It's a very bad thing. Don't engage in it. No, you can come up with a story, like just a normal discussion. Today, I heard that a child up there was raped, and I want us to talk about it. Have you ever heard about rape? They could tell you yes, because they hear about it in school. Children are able to engage in conversations more than what we can even think. Now, they can be able to build that space where they feel safe to talk to you about certain things once you give them an opening to do so. So when you bring that kind of a conversation in, like, have you ever heard about rape? This is how it happens. You can engage in an open discussion, and this way you can make them feel that in case someone ever attempts, because a rapist is not written on the face. And we can never tell what one will become in the next 1 week. You don't know. We cannot really tell. If you ask some of the persons who are engaged in, say, terrorism or warfare, these are the normal people. And somewhat or somehow they got radicalized and they're who they are. So you do not know what could trigger someone into wanting to become a perpetrator. So once you begin with that conversation, you need to let them know who their potential perpetrators can be. It is very important. I did not want to disclose that mine was relative, but think of the closest relative that can really abuse a child. Someone really close that you think this cannot happen. Parents? Parents? Yes. And so in this case now, your child has to know that this is possible and let them know that this person should not. And there are some things you have to be able to stop from happening. Like, if someone is giving you a bath, they should not finger or try to send your hands into your vagina. If it's an auntie, they should not play with your penis. It is wrong. So these are the conversations we need to have with our children. And from there, you give them an opening. Once a child feels safe with their parents first, then I think they are better much protected. Before we can say, okay, teachers can do their own and stuff. How can communities help victims of child sexual abuse or victims of sexual abuse or sexual assault or rape in general? As a community, you have to own the fact that rape is wrong or rape is a crime. That is the first thing. And then once the community has owned it and has made it that, starting even from the quarterhead, like if we should hear news that this person was abused by this person, this is a punishment from the community because this is wrong and should not happen, especially to children. Second would be communities should not stigmatize survivors because this is one of the things that survivors are afraid of. I could be abused and I would never want to share it because I'm afraid that I'll be passing tomorrow and someone will point and say this is a person who was raped yesterday. So we should not stigmatize. Instead, we should make them feel supported and let them know that the problem is not them. It is the perpetrator and not them. And so basically it's about making sure that measures are put in place to ensure that children are better protected and also ensuring that the survivors feel safe still being in that community and not feeling that stigmatized in the community. How can we encourage survivors to be bold and brave like me? To be able to share their stories, not necessarily share their stories, but to be able to overcome their abuse? That is a very big question because it is a whole journey to be able to overcome that pain and be able to share your story, but it is possible. And that all depends on, first off, survivors need to be able to be exposed to environments that make them feel safe to share. Because if I do not feel safe enough to share, I don't think I would want to. And I would feel like maybe if I'm sharing, these people will just insult me afterwards. Because there are instances where, as an activist myself, I've shared story and you want to come and say, now that one day they be raping her. Or if you're passing somewhere, like I've done market to market too. When you're passing in the market and those women say, they rape now, they rape now, they rape now you. So the whole thing already you start feeling like there is a tag. And so it is a very big decision first to be able to accept that this happened and then decide that this is not going to limit or this is not what makes you. So survivors on their path need to understand that the abuse happened, yes, and they should not stay in the abuse. The perpetrator might be roaming about, but if you decide to stay there, it's like you've kept yourself in a box. And there are so many amazing things that life can offer you as a person first. And so we should not let an abuse limit us in terms of this is what happened and this is who I am. Because there is just a lot. I don't know how so many people, like there's some persons I've advocated and they say, when they advocate against rape, rape where it is sweet so, if they advocate na waiting, you say, wait, I define person wey go can't rape me. These are some of the things we hear, mainly from the male though. But I do not know how to explain the pain that comes with being abused. Is there a lot of ignorance in the case of child sexual abuse? I will not say it's ignorance. The people are aware, but they're not acting. Now, that is what, for me as an activist, I mainly say focus on potential victims of the abuse. If I am afraid that children are being abused, I go to children. And I talk to them as much as possible and give them ways in which they can protect themselves. Then I can talk to the parents. Because I do not know, parents are still so afraid to talk about some of these things. Worst is if their child is abused. I've had a case where I was able to talk to a survivor and they opened up after my session in their class. But you would not believe that once we went through the process until we got to the stage where they got this trauma healing service or social work service, the mother came and said, this child is actually possessed. She was not raped, it's possessed. That the child is possessed, there's something wrong with her. Parents or guardians of survivors or victims are afraid to see that they have a survivor. They do not want to accept that they have a survivor or that their child can be a survivor, to the point that they do not even talk about it. And so this is what pushes so many people into abusing them. I believe so much advocacy has been done. People have heard about it so much. And if we are still in the state where you will go to a police station and the perpetrator can still bribe and you as a family will stay quiet, that is, the perpetrator can give you some money and you as a family will accept and tell your child to stay quiet, then that means the problem is still us refusing to act. My message is there are people out there who are actually perpetrators of this abuse. And if we are already victims, then it is time for us to speak up against these perpetrators. And should we not be victims, then we need to know that there are people who are capable of doing this to us, and we should not let them do it. And if there is someone out there who is already a survivor of the abuse, I want to let you know that it is possible to come out of the chains or anything that this abuse might have put you through. It is long, it is hard, it is difficult. It's going to take maybe a little longer, but it is possible. So do not let yourself be limited to just the act of one person. Explore your person and achieve whatever it is you want to achieve for yourself, and always be happy.